A suspicious heir decides to test his fiancée by hiding under the bed in his own suite. When he hears her revealing a cruel plan against his mother and conspiring with a lover, his doubts are confirmed. From that moment on, he changes not only his fate, but the course of the entire household. There are stories we carry in our hearts as if they were secrets kept in an old wooden box, the kind that stays hidden in the back of a closet. Stories that change everything, that transform the way we look at people, at life, at what truly matters. And the one I'm about to tell is one of them. A story that I, Celia Roberts, a housekeeper for over 22 years in the same house, witnessed from beginning to end, with these eyes God gave me, and this heart that learns every day what loyalty means. I've worked in the Anderson mansion since I was a young woman. I arrived here at 30, coming from rural Georgia with just the clothes on my back and a cardboard suitcase full of dreams and hope. Today, I'm 52, and this house has become more than my workplace. It has become my second family, my home, my reason for waking up every day at 5 in the morning with a heart full of gratitude. The mansion is located in one of New York City's most prestigious neighborhoods, the Upper East Side, a region where the trees are old and leafy, where high walls protect not just properties, but entire histories of families who built empires. The Anderson house is imposing, with 3 floors, gardens that look like works of art, an infinity pool that reflects the New York sky, and an electronic gate that opens with a discreet whisper. But what always impressed me about this house was never the luxury. It was the love, the true love that always existed between a mother and her son, between Mrs. Eleanor and her Richard. Mrs. Eleanor Anderson is a 73-year-old woman, elegant even in her fragility. She was married to Dr. Anthony Anderson, a technology visionary who founded TechVision, one of the country's largest software companies. When Dr. Anthony passed away 8 years ago, the victim of a sudden heart problem that took him by surprise, Mrs. Eleanor thought she wouldn't be able to go on. But she had a powerful reason to continue. Richard, her only son, the heir to everything his father had built with so much sweat and dedication. Richard Anderson, now 38, is the kind of man who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders without complaining. Tall, with deep brown eyes that seem to see beyond what people show, his black hair always neatly combed. He inherited from his father not only the company, but also the sense of responsibility and the obsession with doing everything right. Since he was 28, when he took over TechVision after his father's passing, Richard transformed the company into an even bigger giant, expanding into international markets, creating jobs, changing lives. But I always knew something that few others did. Behind that serious man, those endless meetings and those impeccable suits, there was a devoted son, a son who visited his mother every day, who had dinner with her whenever possible, who held her hand when she felt pain from the arthritis that had been worsening over the years, who hired the best doctors in New York to care for her. And it was precisely this son's love that led Richard to make the most difficult decision of his life. It all began about 6 months ago, when Richard brought Isabella Martin to see the mansion. She was everything one would expect from a fiancée for a man like him. Beautiful, sophisticated, always dressed in designer clothes, with perfectly styled blonde hair, weekly manicures, and a white rehearsed smile. Isabella worked at a renowned advertising agency, came from an upper-middle-class family in New York, and had that confident air of someone who has always gotten what she wanted in life. From the very first day, I watched her closely, not out of suspicion, but because it's my way. When you work in a house for so many years, you learn to read people like open books. And with Isabella, something always bothered me, though I couldn't say exactly what. She was polite to me, always saying good morning, please, and thank you. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at Mrs. Eleanor. Something I couldn't name, but that left me uneasy. It was as if she were playing a role, as if every gesture was calculated, every word was measured, every smile was a carefully placed mask. Richard was in love, that was obvious, or at least that's what he thought. He spoke of her with a sparkle in his eyes, planned their future, showed his mother ideas for the ceremony. The wedding was set for 2 months from then, at the end of November, a beautiful time in New York when the vibrant colors of autumn are still lingering and the air is crisp and clear. Mrs. Eleanor never said anything openly, but I could tell. A mother knows, a mother feels, and Mrs. Eleanor felt that something wasn't right. She told me once, while I was arranging the pillows on her bed, that she had a tightness in her chest whenever she saw Isabella. It wasn't jealousy, she explained, it was intuition. It was that sixth sense that mothers have, that internal alarm that goes off when something threatens their children's happiness. It was on a Tuesday in early September that everything began to change. Was in the kitchen preparing lunch, a recipe for chicken and dumplings that Mrs. Eleanor adored, when I heard raised voices coming from the living room. It wasn't my habit to eavesdrop on others' conversations, but Richard's voice was different. Tense. Worried. I discreetly approached and saw Richard sitting on the leather sofa, his head in his hands. Mrs. Eleanor was beside him, in the motorized wheelchair she used on days when the pain in her legs was worse, holding her son's hand with all the tenderness in the world. "Richard, my son, tell me what's bothering you," she said, with that voice that was both soft and firm. He sighed deeply before answering. "Mom, I don't know if I'm going crazy, but I've been noticing some strange things. Little things. You know, the way Isabella talks to you sometimes, her tone of voice, the impatience when you ask for help. Just yesterday, when you asked her to get you a glass of water, she rolled her eyes. I'm sure I saw it." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed her son's hand. "I've felt it too, Richard, but I didn't want to worry you. You're so happy, so involved with the wedding preparations." Richard lifted his head and looked at his mother with those eyes I'd known since he was a boy. "My happiness will never come before yours, Mom. Never. And if something is wrong, I need to find out. I need to be sure I'm making the right choice." It was in that moment that I understood the gravity of the situation. Richard was beginning to have doubts, and a man like him, accustomed to making decisions that impacted thousands of people, to managing crises, to solving complex problems, did not doubt for no reason. In the following days I started paying more attention myself, and I saw things that made my blood run cold. I saw Isabella sigh with impatience when Mrs. Eleanor asked her to adjust the pillows. I saw the way she looked at her future mother-in-law's medications, as if they were an unbearable burden. I saw how she completely changed her posture when Richard entered the room, instantly transforming into an attentive and loving fiancé. A week after that conversation, on a Saturday morning, Richard called me for a private talk in his office. The office was on the second floor of the mansion, a place I only entered to clean. It was a masculine space, with shelves full of books on business and technology, an imposing mahogany desk, leather armchairs, and a privileged view of the garden. "Celia, I need your help," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me sit in the chair he offered. For the first time in so many years, he was no longer my employer. He was a worried son, a man on the verge of making a decision that would change his life forever. "I'm at your service, Mr. Richard," I replied, using the formal address. I always had, even after so many years together. He shook his head. "You don't need to call me Mr. today, Celia. Today I'm just Richard, a confused man who needs the wisdom of someone who knows this house better than anyone." What he told me over the next 2 hours was both impressive and frightening. Richard had discreetly hired a private investigator to do a background check on Isabella. It wasn't that he doubted her honesty in terms of a criminal past or anything like that. It was deeper. He wanted to understand who she really was when she wasn't performing. The results were disturbing. Isabella had a history of previous relationships that ended abruptly, always with the men discovering infidelity or lies. There were reports from ex-boyfriends who mentioned her excessive interest in money and status. One of them, a construction mogul, had broken off their engagement after discovering she was having a parallel affair with one of his business partners. But that wasn't all. Richard had noticed strange movements in one of his secondary bank accounts. Small transfers, amounts that individually didn't draw attention, but which added up over 3 months, came to almost $50,000. And Isabella had access to this account because Richard, naively trusting, had added her as an authorized user after they got engaged. "Celia, I need to know the truth," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to see with my own eyes who she really is. And for that I need your help. I need you to be part of a plan I've come up with. a plan that will reveal Isabella's true face, if there is indeed a different face from the one she shows me. "What are you planning, sir?" I asked, feeling my heart race. Richard stood up and walked to the window, observing the garden outside. "I'm going to conduct a test that will show how Isabella treats my mother when she thinks no one is looking. And you, Celia, will be my silent witness." And so, 3 days later, on a sunny Wednesday in September, the plan was put into action. Richard announced at breakfast that he had an important doctor's appointment with Mrs. Eleanor that morning. A renowned neurologist, he explained, had managed to squeeze his mother in for an emergency evaluation. Isabella, who had spent the night at the mansion, immediately offered to accompany them. "No need, my love," Richard replied with a smile that hid the storm inside. "You have that important client meeting at the agency, remember? Mum and I will go with Sebastian, our trusted driver. We'll be back before lunch." Isabella seemed relieved, though she tried to hide it. "Are you sure? I can reschedule the meeting if you need me." No, don't worry. Take the opportunity to work peacefully here at home. The mansion is yours," he said. And I, who was serving fresh coffee, noticed the double meaning in his words. At 9 in the morning, Richard and Mrs. Eleanor left through the main door, getting into the black armored car that was waiting for them. Sebastian, the driver who had worked for the family for 15 years, was in on everything. He drove normally to the corner, turned right as he always did. But then, instead of heading to the doctor's office in Midtown Manhattan, he made a U-turn through side streets and returned to the mansion, entering discreetly through the back garage, the one I used to store cleaning supplies and which had direct access to the service area. I was waiting as arranged. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I helped Mrs. Eleanor out of the car and back into her wheelchair. Richard, his face tense and determined, held my hand for a brief second. "Thank you for doing this, Celia. I know it's not easy for you." "I would do anything for you and your mother, Mr. Richard. Anything." Sebastian took Mrs. Eleanor back to the car, proceeding to the hospital as planned. She would be safe there, having routine checkups that had been scheduled for weeks while we discovered the truth about Isabella. Richard asked me to take him to the master bedroom, the room he shared with Isabella when she stayed at the mansion. The room was spacious, luxurious, with a king-size bed covered in Egyptian cotton sheets, silk curtains that filtered the sunlight, and a Persian rug worth more than I earned in a year. Richard looked around as if seeing it all for the first time, as if every object there now had a new meaning. He looked at the bed, and then at me. "I'm going to stay under here, Celia. I know it sounds crazy, but I need to hear. I need to know if my intuition is right." I helped him get into position under the bed, a space large enough to accommodate him, though certainly uncomfortable. I arranged the covers that fell to the floor, ensuring he was completely hidden. Before leaving the room, I looked at him one last time. "May God protect us from what we're about to discover," I whispered. I went downstairs with wobbly legs, returning to the kitchen where I continued preparing lunch as if nothing were happening. Isabella was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with her laptop on her lap, apparently working. She was wearing an expensive sweatsuit, the kind that costs over $1,000, but looks simple, and her hair was tied up in a high ponytail. "Celia, could you bring me a coffee?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the screen. "Of course, Miss Isabella, I'll make it right away." I returned with a cup of coffee on the silver tray, along with butter cookies I had made the day before. I placed everything on the coffee table carefully. Isabella picked up the cup without thanking me, without looking at me, as if I were part of the furniture. I returned to the kitchen and stood there, my heart heavy, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally show its ugly face. The wall clock read 10:15 in the morning. Upstairs, hidden under the bed, Richard waited in silence. And it was then, a few minutes later, that Isabella's phone rang. I heard her answer, and her tone of voice changed completely. It was a voice I had never heard before, an intimate, affectionate voice, full of complicity. "Hi, love. Yes, you can talk. I'm alone." "Richard. Just left with the old woman for another appointment. You can't imagine what a pain it is to have to pretend I care about her." I felt my blood run cold. I wiped my hands on my apron and slowly approached the living room, pretending to arrange the picture frames on the bookshelf. Isabella had her back to me, completely engrossed in the conversation. "I know, love, but it's not much longer now. 2 months, and I'll marry that fool. Then phase 2 of our plan begins. I'll convince him to put that annoying old woman in a luxury nursing home. I'll say it's for her own good, that the care there is better, that she needs specialized attention, and he'll believe it because he's so easy to manipulate when it comes to his mother." She laughed. It was a cold, calculating laugh that made me feel nauseous. "And then, my love, this mansion will be all ours. No mother-in-law to get in the way. No need to pretend I'm the perfect daughter-in-law. And the best part? That idiot has no idea I've been siphoning money from his account for months. Small amounts he doesn't even notice I've already saved. Up a good sum, enough for us to spend a few months abroad if we need to." I had to lean on the bookshelf to keep from falling. My hands were shaking so much I almost knocked over one of the picture frames. Upstairs, I knew Richard was hearing every word, every lie, every revelation of who this woman he was about to put a ring on really was. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Isabella detailing plans, laughing at Richard's naivety, and belittling Mrs. Eleanor. When she finally hung up, I was already back in the kitchen, but my whole body was trembling. 22 years working in that house, 22 years seeing that family with all the respect and love in the world, and now I was witnessing a betrayal so cruel I could hardly believe it. An hour later, as had been arranged, Sebastian called to say they were returning. I ran upstairs to tell Richard, knocking lightly on the bedroom door before entering. "Mr. Richard." "They're on their way back," I whispered towards the bed. He slowly slid out from under the bed, and when I saw his face, my heart broke. His eyes were red, his jaw was clenched, his hands were balled into fists. He had heard everything, every poisonous word, every cruel plan. "Thank you, Celia. Thank you for being here." I couldn't reply. I just held his hand for a second, conveying all the support I could. Richard came down with me via the service stairs, exiting again through the back, to meet the car that was already in the garage. Minutes later, the charade resumed. Richard and Mrs. Eleanor entered through the main door, chatting naturally about the fictitious appointment. Isabella came to meet them with a perfectly rehearsed, worried smile. "How did it go, love? Is your mother okay?" Richard hugged her, but I saw it. I saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the effort he was making not to explode right there. "Everything's fine, Izzy. The doctors said she's stable, nothing to worry about." "What a relief," she said, kissing his cheek. In that moment, watching that scene, I knew the storm was just beginning. The veil had been lifted, the mask had been torn away, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same in the house I called home. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The days that followed that Wednesday were the most tense I have ever lived through in that house. It was as if a time bomb were hidden in some corner of the mansion, ticking away with every second, and only I, Richard, and Mrs. Eleanor knew it was about to explode. Richard continued with his normal routine, or at least he tried. He left early for Tech Vision, returned in the late afternoon and had dinner with his mother, and Isabella when she was there. But I saw the difference. I saw the way he looked at his fiancée now, as if studying a stranger, deciphering every gesture, every word, every fake smile. Mrs. Eleanor, for her part, was visibly shaken. We spoke alone that same afternoon after Isabella left for a meeting at her agency. I sat beside her chair in her room, holding her delicate, frail hand, while she cried in silence. "Celia, how did I not see this before?" she said, wiping her tears with a lace handkerchief. "How could I have been so blind? That woman was planning to take me away from my own son, to lock me up somewhere far from him, as if I were a nuisance, a dead weight. It's not your fault, Mrs. Eleanor. People like that are professionals at deceiving. They are experts at pretending, at wearing masks. But thank God Mr. Richard found out in time, before it was too late." She squeezed my hand tightly. "Thank you for being here, Celia. Thank you for being the eyes and ears of this house. You are so much more than an employee to us, you are family." Those words. Those moved me deeply, but I had no time to respond because we heard footsteps in the hallway. Isabella had returned early. Mrs. Eleanor quickly dried her face and composed herself, once again assuming the role of the polite and welcoming mother-in-law she had been playing for months. It was on Friday, 2 days after the incident under the bed, that the situation took an even more dramatic turn. Richard called me to his office again in the early afternoon. When I entered, I found him and his mother there, sitting side by side with serious and determined expressions. "Celia, please. Sit down," Richard said, pointing to the leather armchair in front of his desk. "We need to talk about the next steps." I sat down with a racing heart, sensing that something even more intense was coming. Richard took a deep breath before he began. "I've spoken at length with my mother about everything we heard, about the lies, the plans, the disrespect, and we've decided we need more proof, concrete proof that leaves no room for doubt or manipulation." "What kind of proof, Mr. Richard?" He laced his fingers together on the desk with that piercing gaze he used. "In the most important business meetings, Isabella mentioned on the phone that she has a lover, a man with whom she is planning all of this. I need to see who he is. I need to have visual and audio evidence of what she is capable of doing inside my own home," Mrs. Eleanor added, her voice choked with emotion. "My son wants to give her the chance to reveal who she really is, without a shadow of a doubt. And I agree. Because when all of this comes to light, she can't have any way to deny or distort the facts." Richard opened a drawer and took out a small electronic device I didn't recognize. "I have a friend, Frank Rivers, an expert in corporate security. He works with state-of-the-art surveillance systems. We spoke yesterday, and he offered to help us. We're going to install hidden cameras at strategic points in the house." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Cameras? In the house?" "Yes. Discreet, invisible to the naked eye, and completely legal, since this is my property and I have the right to install security systems. The cameras will film and record audio. All we need is an opportunity for Isabella to reveal herself completely." "But how will you create that opportunity?" I asked. It was Mrs. Eleanor who answered. "We won't create it, Celia. We will just watch and wait. Richard will continue to pretend he knows nothing. Isabella will continue to believe she is in control, and when she makes a mistake, when she completely lets her guard down, we will be ready to record everything." The plan was both brilliant and terrifying. Frank Rivers arrived on Saturday morning, entering through the back garage in a discreet car. He was a man in his 40s, serious professional, carrying 2 black cases full of equipment. Richard greeted him personally and asked me to help them. We spent the next 3 hours installing micro-cameras in strategic places, one hidden in the living room chandelier, another disguised as a fake book on the shelf, a third in a smoke detector in the hallway, and the most important one of all, positioned discreetly in an ornamental plant pot in the room that led to the pool. Frank explained that all the cameras transmitted real-time images to a system that Richard could monitor from his laptop. High-definition image quality, crystal-clear audio, automatic cloud storage. It was cutting-edge technology, the kind used in corporate intelligence operations. "Everything's set," Frank said as he finished, packing away his tools. "The system is active and working perfectly. Anything that happens in this house from now on will be recorded. Thank you, my friend." "I don't know how to thank you," Richard said, shaking his hand firmly. "You don't have to thank me. You got me out of a tough spot 3 years ago when no one else believed in me. This is the least I can do, and Richard, be strong. What you're about to find out could be much worse than you imagine." After Frank left, the house returned to its usual tense silence. Isabella had spent the weekend at her apartment, claiming she needed time to get ahead on work for the agency. Richard didn't question it, just agreed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Sunday night when Isabella returned, bringing with her that expensive perfume that left a trail through the rooms. She was different, more animated, almost euphoric. She kissed Richard with more intensity than usual, hugged Mrs. Eleanor with an effusiveness that seemed too forced to be genuine, and even greeted me with a wide smile. "Celia, "You look beautiful today," she said, and I almost choked in surprise. Never before had she commented on my appearance. "Thank you, Miss Isabella," I replied, suspicious. That night, during the dinner I had prepared with special care, curry chicken with coconut rice and grilled vegetables, Isabella was particularly talkative. She told animated stories about meetings at the agency, laughed loudly, constantly touched Richard's arm, and tossed her hair back with that studied gesture women use when they want to seduce. Richard responded in the same tone, smiling, agreeing, pretending to be completely engaged. But I saw it. I saw the tension in his shoulders. I saw how his eyes occasionally darted to his mother, seeking strength. Mrs. Eleanor also played her part, making comments about the wedding preparations, about the dress she had ordered for the ceremony, about the joy of seeing her son finally find someone to share his life with. It was a cruel theatre, a game of masks where everyone pretended not to know that the end was already written, that the truth was just waiting for the right moment to explode and shatter everything. After dinner, Isabella offered to help Mrs. Eleanor to her room. I was about to intervene, but Richard gave me a discreet nod. "No, let her. We need to see how far she'll go." I followed them from a distance, going up the stairs behind them. Isabella pushed Mrs. Eleanor's wheelchair, and I could hear their conversation. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you more tired today?" Isabella asked, with that tone of false concern I knew so well. "A little, dear. Age catches up with you, and the body asks for more rest. Have you ever thought about having a full-time nurse? You know, someone specialized in care for people of your age with your conditions. It would be much more comfortable for you." I felt my blood boil. She was starting. She was planting the seeds of her plan. "There's no need, my angel. Celia helps me with everything, and my son is always around. I'm very well cared for." "Yes, but Celia doesn't have specific training, right? No offense, but caring for someone with your needs requires technical knowledge. And let's be honest, Mrs. Eleanor, Richard works so hard, he gets so tired. It would be one less burden for him if you were in a place where you had all the necessary professional care." They reached the room and Isabella helped Mrs. Eleanor transfer from the chair to the bed. But the way she did it, with rough and impatient movements, made me clench my fists. Mrs. Eleanor noticed it too. I saw it in the way she looked at me when Isabella left the room. "Did you hear that?" she whispered when we were alone. "I heard everything, Mrs. Eleanor. She's starting to execute her plan. She wants to convince Mr. Richard that you need to go to a nursing home. That viper, that poisonous snake." Mrs. Eleanor had tears in her eyes again. "Celia, if my son hadn't found out in time, I could have ended up separated from him, thrown somewhere, alone, far from everything I love." I held her hands firmly. "That's not going to happen, I promise. We will protect you. Mr. Richard will protect you. That woman will not destroy this family." On Monday, Richard had to travel to Philadelphia for an important meeting with Tech Vision investors. He didn't want to go, but it was something that had been scheduled for months and couldn't be postponed. Before leaving, he called me again. "Celia, I'm leaving the monitoring system active. Anything strange, any suspicious movement, you call me immediately. I'll have my phone with me at all times." "You can count on it, Mr. Richard. I'll keep an eye on everything." He left at 6 in the morning, taking only a small briefcase. Isabella was still asleep in the guest room, where she stayed when she spent the night at the mansion. I prepared breakfast as usual, tidied up the house, and remained alert to every movement. Isabella woke up around 9, coming downstairs, already dressed and made up, ready for another day of work. Or so she said. "Good morning, Celia. Has Richard already left?" "Yes, he has. He traveled to Philadelphia. He has meetings there all day." I saw a different glint in her eyes. "Oh, that's right. He mentioned that yesterday. So it's just us here in the house today, right?" "That's right. Me, you, and Mrs. Eleanor." She picked up a cup of coffee, took a sip, and then did something that surprised me. She took out her phone and went out into the garden, walking to a more secluded area near the pool where she thought no one could hear her. But she didn't know that one of the most powerful cameras was right there, hidden in that plant pot, capturing not only video, but also high-quality audio. I went back to the kitchen and, without anyone seeing, took out my own phone and sent a message to Richard. "Isabella is in the garden. On the phone. Seems important. His reply came in seconds. I see everything. Continue your normal routine. My heart raced. He was watching, he was seeing in real time whatever Isabella was doing. I tried to stay calm, returning to my tasks, but my mind was out there in that garden, imagining what was being said. Later, when Richard returned that night, exhausted but with that determined look, he told me everything. Isabella had called her lover, a man named Leonard Costa, an import-export businessman divorced, known for frequenting the same social circles as Isabella. They talked for almost half an hour, and Richard had recorded every second. She told him that today would be the perfect day to meet, that I was away, that the house was practically empty, that they could make plans calmly, he told me, and I could see the pain in his eyes. But that's not what shocked me the most, Celia. It was what she said next. What was it, Mr. Richard? She said that as soon as we're married, she'll start manipulating me to have my mother institutionalized. She said she has a neurologist friend who will write a false report, attesting that my mother needs 24-hour institutional care. She said I'll believe it because I trust her, because I'm blinded by love. I felt sick. What a monstrous creature. What kind of human being could plot something so cruel? There's more, he continued, his voice trembling. She arranged to meet him tomorrow night, Tuesday. She's going to say she's tired, that she wants to go to bed early. I'll pretend to believe her and stay in the office working. She'll come downstairs, open the pool door, the one with direct access to the outer garden, and let him in. She's going to bring that man into my house, Celia, into the house where my mother sleeps. I had to sit down. My legs wouldn't support me anymore. That's worse than anything I could have imagined. Richard ran a hand over his face, visibly exhausted. Tomorrow is the day, Celia. Tomorrow we will have all the proof we need. We will record everything, and then I will confront her. I will show her that her castle of lies has completely crumbled. Do you want me to do anything? Just keep being yourself. Keep being my eyes and ears here. And when it all happens tomorrow night, I want you to be with me. I want you to be a witness to all of this. Because you, Celia, are the only person in this house besides my mother that I trust. Completely. That night was the longest of my life. I could barely sleep in my little room at the back of the house, tossing and turning, thinking about everything that was to come. The confrontation, the revelation, the unmasking. It was like being in the middle of a storm and knowing the worst was yet to come. On Tuesday, everything proceeded normally. Richard went to the Tech Vision office in the morning and returned mid-afternoon. Isabella showed up for dinner, beautiful and fragrant, wearing a red dress that highlighted her curves. She was clearly dressing to impress someone. But that someone wasn't Richard. During dinner, I made sure to observe every detail. The way Isabella touched her phone every 5 minutes, checking messages, the restrained, almost secretive smile that danced on her lips, the poorly disguised restlessness, as if she were anxious for the night to arrive. Richard noticed all of this too, but he continued to play his part. He talked about work, about the new contracts Tech Vision was closing, about the final preparations for the wedding. Mrs. Eleanor participated in the conversation when she could, but I saw the effort it took for her to maintain her composure. The pain of knowing that this woman had planned to separate her from her son was etched in every line of her face. After dinner, Isabella yawned theatrically. Wow, I'm so tired. I think I'll go up early tonight. It's been an exhausting week at the agency. Richard stood up and kissed her on the forehead. Get some rest, love. I'm going to stay in the office a bit longer. I have some important emails to answer. She went up the stairs, and I saw her look back once, making sure Richard had really gone to his office. Then she disappeared, down the second-floor hallway. Richard waited 10 minutes before calling me. I was in the kitchen finishing the dishes when he appeared at the door. Without a word, he just gestured for me to follow him. We went to his office, and there, on his laptop screen, I saw it. Isabella wasn't in her room. She had silently come down the service stairs, the same ones I used every day. She was now in the room that led to the pool, opening the glass door, unlocking the discreet gate that led to the outer garden. She's clearing the way for him, Richard said, and his voice was pure ice. Let's wait. Let's see how far this goes. We stood there side by side, watching the screens. And then, about 15 minutes later, we saw a male figure approach. He was a tall, well-dressed man, in designer clothes that I could identify as expensive even through the camera. He entered through the gate Isabella had left open, and she ran to meet him. What I saw next made me want to look away, but I couldn't. I shouldn't. It was my duty to be there, to witness it all. They embraced. They kissed with a passion that was revolting considering that woman was engaged to another man. Then she took him by the hand to the living room, where they sat on the sofa, so close they seemed glued to each other. Richard turned up the audio volume. The words we heard were like stabs. "I got the keys to the safe yesterday," Leonard was saying. "Isabella, my love, everything is lined up. As soon as you're married, we start the operation. Convince him to institutionalize the old woman. We take control of the main finances, and in 6 months, we're in Europe with enough money to live like kings." Isabella laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "He's so predictable, Leo, so naive. He believes everything I say, thinks I'm in love with him, that I want to build a life together. Little does he know the only thing I want is his fortune. And his mother? Won't it be complicated to convince him to institutionalize her? I'm already working on it. I've planted the seeds. He loves his mother too much, so all I need to do is convince him that I'm worried about her, that I want what's best for her. I'll use the love he feels against him. It's almost poetic, don't you think?" Leonard stood up and went to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from Richard's private collection. It was a 30-year-old Macallan, a bottle that cost over $10,000. He poured it as if he owned the place, with the casual arrogance of someone who already feels victorious. Beside me, Richard's hands were clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles were white. His jaw was locked, his gaze fixed on the screen. I could feel the furious storm inside him, the contained rage of a man betrayed in the most vile way possible. "It's time, Celia," he said, standing up. "It's time to end this charade." My heart was beating so hard I thought I would faint. I followed Richard down the hall, descending the stairs with silent steps. He had called 2 private security guards who were already waiting at the back entrance. They were large, serious men, professionals who were part of TechVision's security team. Richard took one last deep breath before opening the living room door, and when he walked in, when Isabella and Leonard looked at him with expressions of shock and terror, I knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same in that house. The truth had finally arrived, and it was devastating. There are moments in life that are etched into memory like permanent scars. Moments when time seems to stop, when every second drags on like an eternity, when you know you are witnessing something that will change everything forever. And that Tuesday night was exactly like that. When Richard opened the living room door, the expression on Isabella's face was something I will never forget. It was like watching a mask shatter into pieces. The seductive smile she had been giving Leonard froze, transforming into pure terror. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open in a silent gasp of shock, and for a brief instant, she was completely paralyzed. Leonard was quicker to react. He jumped up from the sofa, nearly knocking over the glass of whiskey he was holding. His eyes darted between Richard and the door, as if calculating his chances of escape. "Richard, I can explain," Isabella finally managed to say, but her voice came out weak, trembling, completely different from the confident tone of minutes before. Richard entered the room with slow, deliberate steps. There was a frightening calm about him, as if he were in complete control of the situation. And he was. He held his open laptop, the screen facing them, showing the footage that had been recorded over the last 20 minutes. "Explain," he said, and his voice was pure ice. "Explain what, exactly, Isabella? Explain why you brought your lover into my house. Explain why you were drinking my whiskey while planning to rob me. Or perhaps you'd like to explain how you intended to institutionalize my mother using fake medical reports to gain full access to my fortune." The color drained from her face with every word. Leonard took a step back, bumping into the coffee table. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. This is between you two." Richard turned his gaze to him, and that look could have frozen hell. "Between us? You trespassed on my property. You plotted along with my fiancée to rob me. No, my dear Leonard Costa, This isn't just between us. This is now a matter involving my lawyers and, if necessary, the police." At that moment, the two security guards entered the room. They were large men with broad shoulders, with that firm posture of those who know exactly what to do. They positioned themselves on either side of the door, blocking any possibility of escape. Isabella then tried one last gambit. She stood up, smoothed her red dress with trembling hands, and walked towards Richard. Tears began to stream down her face, her voice taking on a pleading, almost desperate tone. "Richard, my love, please. This isn't what it looks like. Leonard is just a friend. We were talking about business. He offered me an investment opportunity, and I was considering it." The things you heard were taken out of context. Richard took a step back, moving away from her as if her touch were poisonous. "Taken out of context," he repeated, and a bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Isabella, I have recordings. I have video and audio of everything. From that phone call a week ago when you called my mother an annoying old woman and said you were going to convince me to institutionalize her, to today's conversation in the garden when you confirmed the details of the plan with your lover here. And now this, the two of you, in my living room drinking my liquor, kissing on my sofa, planning my ruin." He held the laptop higher, showing the screen where the footage was still playing. "It's all here, Isabella. Every word, every gesture, every lie." It was as if the floor had disappeared from under her. Isabella staggered, leaning on the arm of the sofa. Her face, previously just pale, now had a greenish tint, as if she were about to be sick. I stood near the door, watching everything in silence. My role there was not to interfere, but to witness, to be the eyes of the truth. And what I saw was the complete unraveling of a woman who had built her entire life on lies. Leonard tried one more time. "Look, Richard, is it? Let's settle this like gentlemen. What do you want? I can compensate you financially for the trouble." Richard's laugh was harsh, almost painful to hear. "Compensate me? You think this is about money? You and she plan to destroy my family. You plan to take my mother away from me, a 73-year-old woman who has never harmed anyone. You plan to use my love, my trust, my kindness as weapons against me. And you think money can fix that?" He turned to the security guards. "Maurice, Fabio, please escort these two people off my property, now." "No!" Isabella screamed, and it was a desperate, ragged cry from someone who knows they have lost everything. "Richard, please, give me a chance to explain properly. I love you. I truly love you. This was all a mistake, a moment of weakness. Leonard manipulated me. He confused me. But my love for you is real." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if her every word were a stab. When he opened them again, there was only sadness there. A deep, resigned sadness. "You know what's saddest about all this, Isabella? It's not the betrayal. It's not the lies. It's knowing that at some point, months ago, I actually believed you loved me. I believed we had a future together, that you would be the mother of my children, my life partner. And now I find out that everything, absolutely everything, was a carefully constructed sham." She tried to approach again, but the guards were already beside her, holding her gently but firmly by the arms. "Richard, I can change, I swear. I can change. Give me a second chance." Richard shook his head. "You had every chance, Isabella. You had the chance to be honest from the beginning. You had the chance to treat my mother with respect and kindness. You had the chance to build something real with me. But you chose to lie. You chose to deceive. You chose to betray. And now you have to live with the consequences of those choices." He nodded to the guards, who began to lead Isabella to the door. She struggled, cried, screamed, but it was useless. Leonard, for his part, tried to maintain some dignity, walking on his own, but the furious glare he shot at Richard spoke more than 1,000 words. Before they left, Richard spoke one last time. "Isabella, tomorrow morning my lawyers will contact you. The wedding is off, obviously. All expenses already paid will be refunded or redirected. You have 3 days to return the engagement ring and all the gifts you received. And as for the money you siphoned from my account, I hope you've saved every penny, because I will demand every last dollar back." Isabella stopped at the door, the guards still holding her arms. "At least give me back my things, my clothes, my belongings that are in the room." Celia will pack everything and send it to your apartment tomorrow. You will not set foot in this house again. Ever. And then they were gone. The guards escorted them to the main gate, making sure they truly left the property. I watched on the security cameras as Isabella got into Leonard's car, sobbing uncontrollably, her face a mess of smeared makeup. When the gate closed behind them, it was as if a huge weight had been lifted from the house. Richard stood there in the middle of the living room, still holding the laptop, his body as tense as a rope about to snap. "Mr. Richard," I said softly, approaching him. "It's over. It's all over." Only then did he break down. His shoulders slumped, the laptop slipped from his hands and fell onto the sofa, and he covered his face with his hands. He didn't cry, but I could see the tremor that ran through his entire body. It was the emotional exhaustion of someone who had just faced one of the most painful moments of his life. "How could I have been so blind, Celia?" he murmured. "How did I not see it before?" I held his arm firmly. "You weren't blind, sir. You were human. You trusted. You loved. You believed in the best in people. That isn't weakness. It's courage." He looked at me, and in those brown eyes was a vulnerability I rarely saw. "Thank you, Celia. Thank you for being here, for being loyal, for being real in a world full of masks." We went up together to see Mrs. Eleanor. She was awake, sitting up in bed, her hands clasped in her lap. When she saw Richard enter, she opened her arms and he went to her like a little boy, resting his head on his mother's shoulder as she stroked his hair. "My son, my dear son," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You were so strong, so brave. I almost married her, Mom. I almost brought that woman into our family. But you didn't. And do you know why? Because you listened to your heart, you listened to your instincts, and you had the courage to seek the truth, even if it was painful." I stood at the door watching that moment between mother and son, and my heart filled with immense gratitude. This family, which I had served for so many years, had survived. It had weathered the storm. The following days were a whirlwind. Richard didn't go to work on Wednesday and Thursday, staying home dealing with calls from lawyers, cancelling wedding vendors, sending out notices to the guests. I helped where I could, packing up Isabella's things that were scattered around the house. Her clothes in the closet, her cosmetics in the bathroom, her decorating books on the shelf. I put everything in boxes and sent them to her address. But it was on Friday that the story really started to spread. The news of the breakup hit the New York social circles like wildfire. First, it was Isabella's closest friends, calling desperately to find out what had happened. Then, it was Richard's business partners offering support. And finally, inevitably, the real story began to leak. Someone, I don't know who, told them about the recordings, about the lover, about the plans to siphon money and institutionalize Mrs. Eleanor. And when that information reached the right people, Isabella's reputation crumbled like a house of cards. I received a call from Marina, one of Isabella's former colleagues at the advertising agency. I knew her because she had visited the mansion a few times for meetings. Her voice was full of indignation. "Celia, is it true what they're saying? That Isabella cheated on Richard and was planning to rob the family?" "It's true, Miss Marina. I saw it all with my own eyes." My God, we worked with her for years and never imagined she was capable of this. She always seemed so professional, so proper. "Well, Ms. Marina, some people are experts at hiding who they really are." In the following days, the agency where Isabella worked asked for her resignation. The reasons were discreet, officially citing internal reorganization, but everyone knew the truth. No one wanted to be associated with her. No one wanted to risk having their reputation tarnished by proximity. Leonard also suffered consequences. His import business began to lose contracts. Partners started to pull away. In New York high society, reputation is everything, and his was destroyed. Isabella tried to defend herself on social media, posting vague texts about misunderstandings and people who distort the truth. But the more she tried to explain, the worse it got. People aren't stupid. They can sense when someone is lying, when someone is trying to play the victim. Richard, for his part, maintained public silence. He gave no interviews, made no posts, did not feed the gossip fire. He had the proof he needed. He had the videos and audio files stored safely, but he chose not to release them publicly. That would have been cruel. It would have been revenge. And Richard was not that kind of man. He just moved on, burying himself in his work. He returned to TechVision the second week after the breakup, attending meetings, closing deals, expanding projects. Colleagues said he was more focused than ever, working late into the night, taking on even bigger challenges. But I saw the truth. I saw how he came home exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. I saw how he went straight up to his room, sometimes without even eating dinner. I saw how on weekends he would sit in his office staring into space, lost in thoughts that surely tortured him. Mrs. Eleanor was worried. She called me almost every day to talk about him. "Celia, my son is hiding in his pain. He's running from his feelings instead of processing them. That's not healthy." "I know, Mrs. Eleanor, but he needs time. The wound is still too fresh." "Time, yes, but he also needs space to truly heal, to understand that not all people are like Isabella, that there is still true love in this world." Her words were wise, as always, and they were prophetic, because it was precisely in those weeks of pain and seclusion that something new began to germinate, something none of us could have foreseen, but which, looking back, made perfect sense. Mrs. Eleanor needed regular physical therapy because of her worsening arthritis. Before, she had her sessions at a private clinic in Midtown, but her doctor had recommended she start doing them at home for greater comfort and efficiency. And so, on an October afternoon, 3 weeks after the end of the engagement, a young physical therapist rang the mansion's doorbell. I went to answer, as always, and when I opened the door, I saw a young woman of simple appearance, about 30 years old, with brown hair tied in a ponytail, wearing the typical white uniform of her profession. She was carrying a large bag with equipment and had a kind, natural smile on her face. "Good afternoon. My name is Marianne Smith. I'm here for Mrs. Eleanor Anderson's physical therapy session." Her voice was soft, polite, without the affectation I had grown accustomed to hearing from Isabella. It was genuine, real. "Please come in, Miss Marianne. Mrs. Eleanor is waiting for you." Marianne entered, carefully wiping her feet on the doormat, looking around with eyes full of respectful curiosity. You could tell she wasn't used to this kind of environment, but she wasn't intimidated either, just impressed in an honest and sincere way. "Wow, what a beautiful house," she commented. "It will be a privilege to work here." I took her to Mrs. Eleanor's room, where she spent the next hour doing exercises with her patient. I stayed nearby, as always, observing, and what I saw touched me deeply. Marianne treated Mrs. Eleanor with genuine affection. It wasn't just professionalism, it was true empathy. She chatted, asked about her life, laughed at the stories Mrs. Eleanor told, and held her hand tenderly when the exercises caused discomfort. "You're doing great, Mrs. Eleanor," Marianne would say encouragingly. "These movements will really help with your mobility. In a few weeks, you'll feel a huge difference." When the session ended, Mrs. Eleanor was visibly more cheerful, and that's when Richard came home, earlier than usual. He walked down the hall and stopped when he saw the physical therapist packing her equipment into her bag. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice in its usual formal tone. Marianne turned, and for the first time, they looked at each other. It was nothing cinematic, nothing dramatic, just two human beings seeing each other for the first time. But I, who had known Richard for so many years, noticed something different. An interest, however discreet, a curiosity. "Good afternoon, I'm Marianne Smith, your mother's physical therapist. She is such a lovely person. You're very lucky to have a mother like her." Richard smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen on his face since the breakup. "I know, I'm very lucky indeed." Marianne finished packing her things and said goodbye. "I'll be back on Thursday for the next session. It was a pleasure to meet you all." After she left, Richard went into his mother's room. Mrs. Eleanor had a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in weeks. "So, my son, what did you think of the physical therapist?" Richard shrugged, but I could see he was trying to hide it. "She seems competent and very kind to you." Mrs. Eleanor smiled, that way mothers smile when they know something their children haven't yet realized. Very kind indeed, and pretty, don't you think? Richard blushed slightly. Mum, please. What? I'm just making an observation. I left the room smiling. Because I had seen it too. I had seen the spark. Still tiny, still fragile, but it was there. And something in my heart told me that this story was far from over. In fact, it was just truly beginning. There are times in life when you realize that God works in mysterious ways, that what seemed to be the end was, in fact, just the beginning of something much bigger and more beautiful. And that's exactly what happened in that house in the months that followed. Marianne Smith began coming twice a week for physical therapy sessions with Mrs. Eleanor. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, always at 3 in the afternoon, she would arrive with that gentle smile, carrying her bag of equipment and bringing with her a light, positive energy that the house hadn't felt in a long time. I watched everything as always, and what I saw filled my heart with hope. Marianne was not just a competent professional. She was a real person. A simple young woman from a humble family in Queens who had studied hard to graduate in physical therapy, working during the day and studying at night. She lived with her parents and a younger sister in Astoria, taking 2 buses and a subway to get to the Upper East Side. But she never complained. On the contrary, she always said she was grateful to have a job, to be able to help people. Mrs. Eleanor grew fond of her quickly, and it wasn't just because of the treatment, which was genuinely showing results. It was for the company. Marianne talked about everything, life, dreams, the little things that make a day worthwhile. She told funny stories from college, talked about the patients she saw in other homes, always with respect and affection, never exposing anyone but sharing the lessons she learned. And Richard, who used to come home and go straight to his room or lock himself in his office, began to adjust his schedule. He started arriving earlier on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always with a ready excuse. He needed to pick up documents, had an important call to make from home, wanted to have lunch with his mother. But I knew. He wanted to be there when Marianne arrived. At first it was just polite greetings, hi, good afternoon, how are you? Then came small conversations in the living room while Marianne packed her equipment. Richard would ask about her work, if she needed any more equipment for his mother's sessions, if there was anything he could provide to make the treatment more effective. Marianne always answered with her natural ease, without affectation, without ulterior motives. She didn't know who Richard Anderson was beyond being her patient's son. She had no idea of the size of the company he ran, the fortune he possessed, the influence he had. To her, he was simply a devoted son who loved his mother. And maybe that was exactly what he needed. Someone who saw him just as Richard, not as an heir, not as a businessman, not as a chess piece in a game of interests. It was on a Thursday, in November, almost 2 months after the breakup with Isabella, that something changed. I was in the kitchen baking a cornbread cake, the one Mrs. Eleanor loved so much, when I heard laughter coming from the living room. Genuine, joyful laughter, the kind that's good for the soul. I approached discreetly and saw Richard and Marianne sitting on the sofa, talking animatedly. She was telling some story about an elderly patient who had confused the exercises and ended up doing completely wrong but funny movements. Richard was laughing, a loose, free laugh that I hadn't heard from him in months. Mrs. Eleanor was there too in her wheelchair, smiling as she watched the two of them. And when our eyes met, she winked at me. It was the confirmation I needed. She saw it too. She also felt that something special was blossoming there. In the following weeks, the conversations between Richard and Marianne grew longer, deeper. He began to share things about his work, about the challenges of managing such a large company, about the constant pressure of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Marianne listened with genuine attention, asked intelligent questions, and offered perspectives he had never considered. One day, while I was serving them coffee, I heard Marianne say something that struck me deeply. "You know, Richard, I think real success isn't measured by the size of a company or the amount of money one has. It's measured by the number of lives one touches positively. And from what you tell me, Tech Vision isn't just a company. It's a place that gives opportunities to thousands of families, that transforms lives, that creates futures. That's much bigger than any fortune." Richard was silent for a moment, just looking at her, and I saw something in his eyes. that I hadn't seen since before he met Isabella. I saw genuine admiration. I saw respect. I saw the beginning of something that he himself was still trying to understand. It was Mrs. Eleanor who gave the final push. One afternoon in December, when New York was already decorated with Christmas lights and the summer heat was starting to build, she called me for a private chat. "Celia, I need your help with something." "You can tell me, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm always at your service. I want to invite Marianne for dinner here, a special Christmas dinner, but I want Richard to be the one to invite her." I looked at her with a knowing smile. "You're playing matchmaker, aren't you?" She laughed, with that mischievous glint that sometimes appeared. "I'm just helping my son see what's right in front of him. That girl is pure gold, Celia. She's exactly the kind of person he needs in his life. Someone real, honest, who loves him for who he is and not for what he has. And what if he doesn't invite her? Then I'll do it myself. But I think he will. He just needs a little encouragement." And she was right. At the next session, after the physical therapy, Mrs. Eleanor casually mentioned that she was thinking of having a more intimate Christmas dinner, just with the really important people. Richard, who was present, took the hint. "Marianne, do you and your family have plans for Christmas?" he asked, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. Marianne seemed surprised. "Well, we usually have a simple dinner at home. My mom makes stuffing and turkey, my dad plays the guitar. It's very homemade." "How about you come for dinner here?" Richard said, and the words came out too, quickly, as if he were afraid he'd regret it if he thought too much. "My mother loves to host, and it would be an honor to have you here." Marianne looked from Richard to Mrs. Eleanor, clearly touched by the invitation. "Really? You really want us to come?" Mrs. Eleanor took her hand affectionately. "We do, dear. You've become very special to me, to us. It would be wonderful to share this day with you and your family." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "Then I accept. I'll tell my parents. They'll be so happy." Christmas arrived with all the magic that December brings. I decorated the whole house with a huge tree in the living room, lights in the windows and wreaths on the doors. The dining table was set with the fine china we rarely used, with scented candles and floral arrangements I made myself. Marianne's family arrived at 7 in the evening. Her father, Mr. Joseph, was a grey-haired gentleman with calloused hands from a lifetime of work as a mechanic. Her mother, Mrs. Rose, was a round, warm woman with the kind of tight hug typical of someone who loves truly. And her younger sister, Julia, was 17 and enchanted by everything. Mr. Joseph was visibly uncomfortable at first, taking off his cap and holding it in his hands. "What a beautiful house, sir. I've never seen anything like it." Richard shook his hand firmly. "I'm glad you could come, Mr. Joseph. This house is blessed to have you here today. The dinner was wonderful. I prepared a succulent turkey, rice with almonds, chestnut stuffing, colorful salads, and for dessert, a chocolate trifle that was a house specialty." During dinner, the conversations flowed naturally. Mr. Joseph told stories from his youth, Mrs. Rose shared recipes, and Julia asked excited questions about everything. And Richard and Marianne, sitting side by side, exchanged glances that said more than 1,000 words. He poured wine for her. She passed the bread to him. They were small gestures, but laden with meaning. After dinner, when everyone went to the living room for coffee, Richard excused himself and quickly went up to the second floor. He returned minutes later, carrying an acoustic guitar that had belonged to his father. "Mr. Joseph, Marianne told me you play the guitar. Would you honor us with a song?" Mr. Joseph's face lit up. "It would be an honor, sir." He took the instrument with reverence, tuned the strings with the skill of someone who has been doing it for decades, and began to play. It was an old song, one of those that speak of true love and family. And as he played, everyone sang along, and the house filled with a joy it hadn't felt in a long time. I looked at Mrs. Eleanor, who had tears in her eyes. I looked at Richard, who was looking at Marianne as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And I looked at Marianne, who was smiling with that beautiful simplicity that defined her. That night marked a turning point. After Christmas, Richard began to invite Marianne to other things. First, it was coffee on a Sunday afternoon. then lunch at a discreet restaurant, then a walk in Central Park, where they walked and talked for hours. I saw the relationship grow, blossoming like a well-tended plant. It was different from anything Richard had experienced with Isabella. There was no rush, no showing off, no falsehood. It was real, it was genuine. It was built on solid foundations of respect, admiration, and true affection. Marianne visited Tech Vision in February. Richard made a point of personally showing her the facilities, introducing her to his colleagues, and explaining the projects. She was impressed, not by the size or luxury, but by the purpose, by the fact that the company truly changed lives, created opportunities, and made a difference. And Richard visited Marianne's home in Astoria. It was a simple house, with a small living room and a tiny backyard, but it was full of love. Mrs. Rose made a delicious lunch. Mr. Joseph showed him his workshop in the back, and Julia showed him the dance trophies she had won at school. Richard felt at home there in a way he never had in the sophisticated places he frequented. It was in April, 6 months after that first Christmas dinner, that Richard called me for another conversation in his office. When I entered, I saw he was nervous. He was pacing, fidgeting with objects on his desk, sighing deeply. "Mr. Richard, is everything all right?" I asked. He stopped and looked at me. "Celia, I need your honest opinion on something very important." "You can tell me." He opened a desk drawer and took out a small blue velvet box. When he opened it, it revealed a white gold ring with a single diamond. But it wasn't a recently purchased ring. It was old, delicate, with a classic design. This was my grandmother's ring. My grandfather gave it to her when he proposed, over 50 years ago. My father gave it to my mother when they got married. And now I want to give it to Marianne. I felt my heart swell with emotion. "Are you going to ask her to marry you?" "I am. But I'm scared, Celia. Scared I'm moving too fast. Scared I'll frighten her. Scared she'll think this is crazy." I held his hands, looking into his eyes. "Mr. Richard, when you know, you know. There's no right or wrong time for true love. And that girl loves you. Anyone who looks at the two of you together can see it. She won't think it's crazy. She'll be happy." Richard closed the box carefully. "I hope you're right, because I can't imagine my life without her." The proposal happened in the mansion's garden on a starry night in May. Richard prepared everything with help from Mrs. Eleanor and me. We filled the garden with candles, laid white rose petals on the path, and played soft music through discreet speakers. When Marianne arrived for what she thought was just dinner, she found that dreamlike scene. Richard was there, wearing a simple but elegant suit, holding the box with the ring. What happened next was the most beautiful scene I have ever witnessed in my entire life. Richard didn't give a rehearsed speech. He simply opened his heart. He talked about how she had come into his life at its darkest moment, how she had shown him that kindness, sincerity, and true love still existed in the world, how she made him a better person, how he wanted to spend the rest of his life by her side, building a family based on the values she embodied: honesty, simplicity, and unconditional love. Marianne cried. She cried so much she could barely speak. But when she finally managed to, she said yes, an emotional, trembling, but absolutely certain yes. Mrs. Eleanor and I watched everything from the living room window, holding each other, crying together. This was the happy ending we didn't know we needed. It was redemption, proof that not all was lost, that there was light after the darkness. The wedding was set for August, and it was exactly as it should be: intimate, sincere, full of meaning. The ceremony took place in the mansion itself, in the garden we all loved so much, with only 30 guests. Marianne's parents, Julia, a few close friends of Richard's from Tech Vision, Marianne's work colleagues, and of course, Mrs. Eleanor and me. Marianne wore a simple, unexaggerated dress that enhanced her natural beauty. Richard couldn't take his eyes off her. When they exchanged vows, there were no memorized lines. They were real promises from the heart, about partnership, respect, love, and companionship. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, we applauded emotionally. And there, in that garden where so much had happened, where falsehood had been unmasked and truth had triumphed, A new story began. The reception was lively but not ostentatious. Mrs. Rose brought her special stuffing, Mr. Joseph played the guitar, and friends gave emotional speeches. Richard and Marianne danced under the stars, and on their faces there was peace. The peace of someone who knows they made the right choice. The peace of someone who has found their place in the world. I was a guest of honor, but I also helped serve because it was in my nature. And when Marianne saw me in the kitchen, she came to me, still in her wedding dress, and hugged me tightly. Mrs. Celia, thank you. Thank you for taking care of this family, for protecting Richard when he needed it most, for welcoming me with open arms. You are so much more than a housekeeper. You are family. I couldn't hold back the tears. And you, my dear, are a blessing. A blessing for him, for Mrs. Eleanor, for this house. In months that followed, the house was completely transformed. Marianne brought life, joy, warmth. She decorated the rooms with plants, put up picture frames with photos of the whole family, including one of me next to one of Mrs. Eleanor. She cooked on weekends, learning my recipes and teaching me some of hers. She cared for Mrs. Eleanor with an affection that went beyond any professional duty. And when, 10 months after the wedding, she announced she was pregnant, the joy in the house was indescribable. Mrs. Eleanor cried with happiness. Richard seemed to be floating, and I thanked God for having lived long enough to see that moment. The baby was born in May of the following year, a beautiful, healthy boy named Anthony, in honor of the grandfather he never got to meet. And when they asked if I would be his godmother, I thought my heart would explode with emotion. Today, as I write this story, I am sitting in the mansion's garden, watching Marianne play with Anthony on the grass. Richard will be home from work soon and will join them. Mrs. Eleanor is on the porch, smiling, watching everything with the satisfaction of someone who has seen her son find true happiness. This house, which witnessed so much deceit, so much betrayal, so much suffering, now breathes love. True love, built on the most solid foundation there is. Truth. I have learned many lessons over these years. I learned that not all that glitters is gold, that people can wear masks so convincing they deceive even the smartest. I learned that loyalty is worth more than any fortune, that humility is a wealth few possess, that true love is recognized not by words but by actions. I learned that sometimes you have to go through the storm to appreciate the sun, that the scars we carry make us stronger, wiser, more prepared to recognize what truly matters. And I learned that my role in this family, even as just a housekeeper, was always much greater than cleaning, cooking, and organizing. My role was to be the eyes that see beyond appearances, the heart that feels the truth, the voice that speaks when necessary, and the silent witness to the moments that build a story. Today, at 54 years old, 24 of which have been dedicated to this house, I can say with pride that I made a difference, that I helped protect a family that always treated me with dignity, that I was part of a story of redemption, of overcoming, of true love. Isabella never showed her face again. I heard through the grapevine that she left New York, moved to Miami, and tried to start over. Leonard also disappeared from social circles. Their stories became mere footnotes in a much larger narrative, because in the end, what prevails is not lies, not betrayal, not self-interest. What prevails is love, genuine love built day by day, in small gestures of affection, in glances that say more than words, in hands that hold on through difficult times, in shared laughter during moments of joy. This is the story I witnessed. This is the story I helped build. And when my time comes to leave, I will go with a heart full of gratitude for having been a part of it, because I, Celia Roberts, housekeeper, silent witness, guardian of this house, have learned that the greatest wealth in the world is not in safes, not in mansions, not in companies. The greatest wealth is in the bonds we build, in the people we love, in the families we help protect, in the love we sow and that flourishes, transforming pain into joy, betrayal into trust, darkness into light. And when I look at this family today, when I see Richard's smile, Marianne's happiness, Mrs. Eleanor's joy, and little Anthony's innocent laughter, I know it was all worth it. Every day of work, every discreet watch, every moment of loyalty, every shared tear, and every celebrated joy, it was all worth it. Because this is not just their story, it is my story too, the story of a simple woman who learned that the most important thing in life is not where you live or how much money you have. The most important thing is who you share your life with, who you build your days with, who you share your joys and sorrows with. And I was incredibly lucky to share my life with this family. A family that taught me that loyalty is reciprocal, that respect is built with actions, and that true love knows no social classes or economic differences. This is our story, the story of how truth defeated lies, of how true love triumphed over falsehood, of how a family survived the storm and found the light. And it all began when someone decided to listen in silence, to watch attentively, and to act with heart. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard, Marianne, Mrs. Eleanor, and Mrs. Celia has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of betrayal, overcoming, and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Did you identify with Mrs. Celia's loyalty? Were you outraged by Isabella's deceit? Were you enchanted by Marianne's simplicity? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and make us reflect on the true value of relationships. Your participation is very important to us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will make you feel, think, and believe in the power of true love.